Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much to the organizers for having me at this great event. As Simona said, I've been on Wall Street for about 20 years, and now I work at KKR, which is one of the largest alternative asset managers in the world. And so I thought for my initial comments, I would make just a few points about what I think the challenges are, like you asked, vis-a-vis women in business or in the financial sector. More broadly, I would say in the private sector, and what we can do, and some ideas on what we're trying to do to try to bridge the gap. I would start with point number one, which is one of my favorite quotes, which is, "You cannot be what you cannot see." And I love that. You cannot be what you cannot see. And sometimes we forget that some of the numbers out there are pretty daunting. I'm just going to give you one statistic. As of September 2018, of the Fortune 500 companies, only 23 have CEOs that are women, and only 2 have both CEO and CFO that are women out of 500. And that would be General Motors. As of recent, they added a CFO who's a woman, and Hershey, the chocolate company. And that's it. And so I think the problem we see is that women come in large size, let's say, out of the MBA programs, the college programs, and get onboarded, like Maria was saying, at the junior level. They slog through the 80-hour week and the difficulties of the first few years. And then by the time they are in the mid-30s, when they get to the challenges of managing the family and a demanding job, a lot of time they quit or take a lesser path or a lesser job. And so what can we do about it? I think that one thing that we all should feel responsible for all of us that do work, is the importance of sticking around. Because it's very hard in certain jobs when you off-ramp to on-ramp again at the same level. And so I think that the ability to create the conditions for women to stick around, and we should not all underestimate our role as leaders and role models for the ones of us who are there, for the younger women that come about. And so I think sticking around is point number one. The second point I would make is I think we do need to change the conversation around women and work, like was said before very eloquently by Teresa and Mercedes. But this is about, for sure, STEM and the education on technology and the training, that's for sure. But I also would ask for the policymakers in the room, please consider the importance of teaching children about financial literacy. Because I find that women are not educated about money, about the financial literacy that is very basic. You talked about the women that don't have bank accounts. I think it's extremely important for women to learn about money and the basics, financial knowledge and skills that they should own. It should be maybe a mandatory topic in school. I don't know, something to think about. And I think that also the culture in certain countries, I'm originally from Milan, women participation to the workforce is so low because culturally, I don't think we have ingrained in our daughters the importance of financial independence and the freedom that comes from it. And I think that's an important, very basic thing to think about it. And of course, then the STEM knowledge, extremely important because we don't want women to participate in the future of work only at the fringe with jobs that are low-paying jobs, and then perpetuating the crisis of, I think, elderly poverty. It's a women's problem, right? And so we don't want that 20, 30 years from now. The third point, and I have a couple more only, is I think we do need to create an environment that is conducive to retaining women in the workforce. And I'm going to give you some examples of things that we're doing to try to fix that. One thing is obviously we're looking at equal pay for equal work. And I think the point that I would like to make is not only for the lower paying job, the gap exists, but it exists, unfortunately, even at the higher level and sometimes in bigger ways. So a friend of mine at Harvard did an analysis looking at the people that graduated from Harvard Business School, which is one of obviously the best business schools in the world. And 15 years after graduating from Harvard Business School, if you take a woman and a man on average post-MBA, the difference in compensation is such that women make only 60% of what men make, even at the higher levels. And I think that is very discouraging. But on the positive front, I think there is more and more a desire to fix that comes not only from the women, but also from the men, and we can get to that. I think the other thing, so beyond the obviously the compensation, which is the single most important thing. I think there's also other things that we can do. So for example, at our firm, we've instituted parental leave for both parents, not just for one. We've even instituted paid childcare for women that need to travel for work. And if they need to come back early and need to travel, they can take their child and a caregiver, a babysitter, for free until the child is 1 year old. We have instituted transition programs so that women can come back from maternity leave and be reinserted with their clients and their teams. We cover all adoption expenses for people that cannot have children and want to adopt children. And more importantly, we have unlimited benefits for fertility treatments, which I think is vital, especially for women that are highly educated, that start their career, maybe think about having a family later. If they want to be facilitated in having a family, irrespective of, I don't want to insult anybody who may think something against fertility treatments. Forgive me, I live in America, so I think it's great. And I think that having the ability for a woman to have unlimited coverage for all fertility treatments, I think is a revolutionary and wonderful thing. And then we have obviously lactation rooms, on-site wellness programs, and all types of facilities for working mothers that can be working and at the same time taking care of their family. And so I think not only these policies, but also the technology revolution will allow for women to work from home, have more flexibility. So I'm actually very optimistic about these changes. The fourth point I would make is we need to involve the men. I think we need to involve the men. I don't think we have involved the men enough. I think one point that I think has been made in the US, I don't know if it's been made here as extensively, is the business case for diversity. I think that's an important case to make for the men, so they're really bought into the importance of this. I think we also have instituted, for example, at my firm, a mandatory bias training where we make sure the men and women are trained to recognize their unconscious bias, to make sure they treat women and men in the same way. And finally, we also have instituted manager accountability. Most of the managers are men, and we want to make sure that they recruit, i.e. attract, retain, and promote women. And they're going to be evaluated on that year over year. And so it's extremely important in our firm, but I think all over Wall Street, to make sure that managers are indeed responsible and accountable for promotion of women. And then, of course, there's the mentoring and the sponsorship. In order to advance, you need to have mentors and sponsors that pound the table for you when you're not there. And I think most of the times in my career, my mentors have been men, and my sponsors have been men for no other reason that most of the senior managers are men, or if not all. And I think that we need to have them embrace the ability to mentor and sponsor women without fear, to make sure that that continues to grow. And then the final point I want to make, and then I'll stop talking, and I'm sure we'll dig deeper later, is I think we shouldn't underestimate the fact that we are all agents of change, and we need to make the change from within. I think you need to be inside the organization and inside the system to really affect change. You can also go outside and start something new on your own, but I think making change within the system is extremely important. For example, you were talking about venture capital. In 2017, if you look at the billions of dollars that were invested in venture capital around the world, only 2.2% of that amount was devoted to companies that were started by a female founder, 2.2%. Now, we tried to look at the statistics of how many companies are indeed started by women, and the statistic is impossible, apparently, to find. It's very small, but it's bigger than 2.2%. So I would say disproportionately true that women are not financed as much as men when they start companies, and that's something we want to change. But if you look, like you said, Maria, at the number of partners in private equity that are women, there's only about 10%. And so my view is if you have more women in private equity or in venture capital that can affect that change and finance the women that start the businesses, it's part of a virtuous cycle. That's just one micro example of the change that you can make for within. And by the way, all the firms in financial services like ours that do control a lot of companies can affect change also more broadly than our own organization. Because, for example, KKR owns about 120 portfolio companies in our private equity complex that are extremely large and employ about 1 million people around the world.
And so what we're trying to do now is to look at the boards of the companies we control and making sure there's women representation on those boards, and making sure that when we recruit talent for the C-suites in the company we control, there's women in the talent pool and in the funnel. So we can affect change in our own companies, but also in the companies that we own. And that's true generally for all of us. I think we should not underestimate the fact that we can all make change in our own lives and in our business wherever we are. And even on the side, like you said, Simona, I invest on my free time in movies because maybe there was a part of me that wanted to be an artist at one point. And I always invest in movies that are written, directed, and produced by women because women are not represented not only in the financial sector where I am, but also in Hollywood. And so I've invested in a film called Equity that's about women on Wall Street because I thought it was a story that needed to be told. It's on Netflix in case you're interested. And it went to Sundance, and I even made money on the movie, so that's great. And now with the money I made from that movie, I invested in a second movie, which is a historical movie about women that used to work for Winston Churchill during the Second World War to be spies in France because the Germans thought that spies would be men and they wouldn't assume that the women indeed were spies that were trying to sabotage the Nazis in northern France. And one of the women that survived, two of them unfortunately died in the concentration camps, but the one that did survive was the first woman that then went on to be an officer for the CIA. And so it's an interesting true story that we're filming right now that hopefully will be successful. I'll let you know when there's a title and it comes out. Anyway, thank you.